Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everyone. Wow. Good afternoon. I'm so glad to be here for three main reasons. Number one, it is my first live event, probably for many of you similar to me, in 2.5 years. So how about a round of applause to that? All right. Now, the second reason I'm really glad to be here is that I literally just recovered from COVID. And it was by the skin of my hair that I actually made it here today. So really glad to be here. The third reason I'm glad is that I'm here to speak about a topic that's really close to my heart: cultivating youth resilience in an uncertain world. I'd like to begin with a story of my student Alex. Years ago, I was not a speaker, I was not a trainer. I was a teacher, just like all of you, in a local school here in Singapore. And I met Alex when he was in grade 4. Now, Alex was the kind of student who would raise his hand enthusiastically to answer every single question. In fact, the first thing he did when he saw me, the first time he ever saw me, was to say, "Miss Yeo, did you know that an octopus has 3 hearts?" I was so flabbergasted by his innate sense of curiosity, his energy, and his strive to do well in his academics. One day, as we were having his spelling test, the students were shuffling and getting ready, all seated there with their spelling books ready to get going. But Alex was not ready. He was kicking his friend's chair. And as a teacher, I did what I knew at the time, a beginning teacher. I said to him, "Alex, stop that right now." And guess what? Do you think he stopped? Instead, he accelerated what he was doing. He kicked it harder. I could feel the blood rising in my body. And I did perhaps what I wish I did not do. I raised my voice and shouted at him, "Alex, you are going to stop that right now because everybody's ready and waiting for you." What transpired next was something I did not expect. Alex stood up from his table, overturned it, and ran out the classroom. There was a beginning teacher. I had no idea what to do. Should I run after Alex? Should I stay in class with the 30 over other students? Because they too were just standing there with their jaws open in shock as to what had just transpired. Alex, my student, who was always so helpful, so collaborative, so enthusiastic, was gone. Hearing the commotion, the teacher next door came over to ask if I needed any help. She looked after my class while I went on a running circus around the school. I went to the library where Alex loved to hang out and read his books. I ran to the canteen thinking that perhaps he had gone for a walk to cool himself down. But no, Alex. After 15 minutes, thoughts were running wild in my mind, and I had to do what I had to do. I had to make that dreaded phone call because I could not find him. As I walked into the staff room, back to my table, guess who was standing there? Alex was carrying a pile of my books. And I said, "Alex, are you okay? What happened just now?" And he said to me, "I'm fine, Miss Yeo. You know, just now, when you first came into class, you said that you had this pile of books on your table, so just came down to get it." It was as if he did not flip that table. It was as if everything was fine. I was puzzled. What was going on with this child? Later, when we had time to calm down, I managed to have a conversation with Alex. And that was when he told me that any kind of test makes him anxious. He had a father who would cane him since he was 2 years old for throwing the remote control at the TV. Like, which 2-year-old doesn't do that? I would be more surprised if they didn't. And so for every single test that he took, his father required him to have 95% or more. And for every mark he did not get close to 100, he would receive 5 strokes of the cane. It was then that I asked myself, what is my role as an educator? Am I just here to be there to teach him the subjects? Or is there more to my role? Surely I would want Alex to be able to thrive. But how could he when he has so much pressure on his shoulders? When he has to go home and face a very demanding parent? And the fact is, when he was in class, he betrayed nothing of that, except for that temper tantrum that I just saw once. In the context of what we have all been going through in the last 2.5 years, it has made me think about Alex again. Surely, in the midst of all your students, and even students that I've known in the past, there must be many students like Alex, feeling the brunt and the pressure, whether it's coming from the environment around them, whether it's coming from internally, them thinking they're not good enough, whether it's coming from familial pressure. Alex reminded me of what the word resilience is, or rather, why I began my journey into positive psychology. Students nowadays have to face many pressures. COVID-19 landed on our laps when we were talking about the VUCA world. We wanted students to be ready for the future, but the future just landed on our laps. None of us were ready. But students faced a lot of challenges. Educators, like all of you, had to make 180 degrees changes, maybe even still doing so, in order to meet whatever it was changing in the external environment. Students had to switch to having online learning. All of you probably had to adapt your lessons to an online platform and still remain engaged with them, checking in on their well-being, making sure that the curriculum would be delivered. Sitting there in the room, I can only imagine the sense of isolation that students must have felt and maybe still feel even up to today. Not only that, some of them, perhaps family members, have had to go through COVID, just like I did. I was lucky in that my family members did not get it, and I was the one in isolation. But I know that in some parts of the world, like Hong Kong and other parts, family members have to be separated, even the children, and that can cause serious pressure and anxiety. Last of all, schoolwork still has to continue. The curriculum still has to go on. Learning has to go on. So the question is, given this external environment, how do we help to build up the resilience of students in this uncertain and challenging world? How do we equip them with the skills and mindset so that they are able to thrive, even though everything else around them seems very overwhelming? Here's where I'd like to pause and ask all of you. We are here to talk about the topic resilience, and I'd like to find out from you, all of you seated here today, and the 800 plus of you who are there online joining us virtually. What does the word resilience mean to you? If you were to think of a definition right at the top of your mind, what would you say? We are now going to head to Mentimeter. You'll see a QR code start to come up on the screen very shortly. Please do scan the QR code, or you could use the code number there by going to menti.com and keying the numbers 60287079. I'd really love to know what your definition of resilience is. Right, very shortly, we'll be able to see some of the responses start coming in. So how would you define resilience? I'm seeing responses like grit, not giving up easily, being able to bounce back when things get difficult, getting up after a fall, the ability to move forward, taking steps despite challenges and adversity, being able to cope with new and challenging environments, maybe sometimes even environments that we are not used to, being able to not give up easily, staying strong. Maybe we can scroll down the page a little just to get more responses coming in. Thank you. Okay, I'm seeing perseverance, moving through adversity, never giving up for doing something, staying strong, remaining stronger, being able to manage yourself. I'm sure there are a lot more responses. But if I were to just generally summarize, we are seeing very common words up there. Being able to bounce back, being able to cope amidst adversity, feeling strong, perhaps the strength that comes from within, the knowledge that you are able to overcome the challenges that come your way, even though you may not have experienced it before. Some of you talked about adaptability, that when things come, maybe you just have to shift a little bit of the way you do things, a little bit of the way you see things, maybe being able to tap into your network. In all, I think resilience can be summarized based on what I'm seeing here. It's about recovery. It's about having resources. It's about facing challenges and being able to cope healthily. Thank you, everybody, for contributing to the quick Mentimeter. I'm going to move on with my slides, because here's where I bring to you a very simple definition of resilience that I think encompasses a lot of what has been shared on the screen, and we're just going to go a bit deeper into this topic of resilience. Now, the American Psychological Association defines resilience in a very broad way, which is the process of adapting well. Many of you talked about this concept of adaptability in the face of adversity and challenges. Now, the fact that the definition includes the word process means that resilience is something that we build up over time. And because it is a process, it is not something that we teach today and our students will know immediately tomorrow. In fact, what it implies is that there is a scaffolding effect. We can teach students about resilience. We can create environments that strengthen resilience, but it's a process that we can begin starting today. The next part of that definition is about adapting well. Now, a student who feels hopeless and overwhelmed could respond in a number of ways. A student who feels trapped inside and all the emotions are like waiting to erupt in a volcano could try to cope by self-harming. I'm sure many of you have seen that in the adolescents and youth you work with as well. We have adolescents who try to cope by talking to their friends. What we want to see is that they're adapting well, meaning that the strategy that they use to adapt is healthy for them and not something that is detrimental to their well-being. And last of all, it's in the face of adversity and challenge. Now, does this mean that our youth will never encounter challenge ever again? Of course, the answer is no. But what it does mean is that when they encounter challenge, they have with them the resources to be able to do so, the resources to recognize the things that they can control from the things that they can't, and perhaps devote their time and energy into the areas in which they can control and influence, and in such cases, being able to meet the adversity and still be able to triumph. Looking deeper into resilience, I like to see resilience as comprising three parts. The first one is social resilience. The ability to know that there's a network of people that you can lean onto, to know that when you ask for help, that is not a sign of weakness. In fact, it is a sign of strength. Knowing that you are struggling and reaching out for help is the thing that we want students to do, particularly in this period of time. We'll talk a little bit about how to facilitate that later. The second piece is mental resilience. When an adversity or challenge is in their way, how are they thinking about the situation? Dr. Martin Seligman, who was my professor at the University of Pennsylvania, wrote the book Learned Optimism. And he talked about explanatory style. How do we explain the reasons why things and situations happen to us? If we explain it from a pessimistic style, we might see challenges as something that's permanent, something that's pervasive, and something that's very personal. However, if we are able to cognitively reframe that, we might see challenges as something that's more temporary, more specific, and perhaps think of the potential alternatives why the situation is very challenging for us. This is what we call mental resilience. Now, the last piece, which we'll be doing a deep dive session later, is what we call emotional resilience. The emotional response to a challenge. What this means is that when students encounter a situation that is challenging and demanding on their resources, instead of getting paralyzed by fear or panic or anxiety, Anxiety is one of the fastest growing concerns of mental health in youth, not just here in Singapore, but around the world. Do they know how to manage the emotion so that they are able to see accurately what's in front of them? And do they know how to express the emotion in ways that are healthy for them? Now, to get some clue on how we can address resilience, because it feels almost like this daunting big thing, how do we even get started? I'd like to go back to some data, which comes from a study by the Health Promotion Board here in Singapore on youth mental well-being, which determines the risk and protective factors of youth mental well-being. I want to argue that many of us think that resilience is about building up the child only. However, looking at this chart gave me great insight that if we want to address the idea of youth resilience, we've got to think bigger. We've got to think more systemically. In the left-hand column, you can see 3 factors: risk factors and protective factors towards youth mental well-being, looking at the individual factors, looking at the family factors, and looking at the school factors. All of you in the audience would definitely be very keenly interested in the school factors, and that's where we're going to spend the majority of our time here today. But it's also the other factors that I think, in the situation that we are facing now, that we need to spend time on. The connection with their family or the community, the connection for themselves, learning to build up the tangible skills that help them to be resilient. Now, looking at this table, you might find some familiar factors, and perhaps in your mind, just like me when I first saw this table, scanning through my mind for the students who are in my class, thinking, what are the risk factors that they have? What are the protective factors that they have? And maybe like me, spending maybe a little too much time on the risk factors, thinking, how can we mitigate some of these risk factors? And definitely, that's an area we need to spend time on. However, I also want to argue that we need to be intentionally conscious about building up the protective factors. In fact, I turn to one of the experts in the area of youth resiliency, Bonnie Bernard, who says that negative factors don't necessarily predict negative outcomes. Students may have had very traumatic beginnings, but it doesn't mean that they're going to have a traumatic rest of their life. However, if we were to think of where to invest our time and resources, which in this pandemic are very limited, we can find a positive association between the positive factors and positive outcomes. So how about spending our time looking at cultivating the positive factors? Let's look at the 3 factors. The first is positive school culture. Second, collaboration with key stakeholders. Third, individual skills that every student can build up. Looking first at positive school culture, the one thing that in resiliency research comes out over and over again as a protective factor is strong and positive teacher-student relationships. In this time, students that have a sense of connection with their teachers are less likely to miss classes, more likely to stay engaged with what they're doing, and more likely as well to reach out for help. And if we want students to be resilient, we need to teach them the capability to reach out, but also create the environment which is able to receive that call for help. Dahl and her colleagues looked at the research and determined that a positive teacher-student relationship is determined by 3 criteria. The first, that students feel valued by the teachers. Their opinions, their ideas, their thoughts, them as a person. Number 2, that they feel supported by the teacher, whether in good times, teacher is there to cheer them on, whether in struggling times, the teacher is there to be the person that they can lean on. And the third one is respected. Are my views respected by the teacher even though they're different? Am I able to be myself and be able to be seen? If we are able to do this, I strongly believe it will contribute directly into cultivating student resilience. Now, in this picture, you can see a teacher trying to engage a student via online platforms. In this time, we've had to innovate our practices. In fact, several teachers over the last Over the last 2 years, I've probably done, 100 webinars with teachers around schools in Singapore and the region, and many of them have done many innovative things to engage their students. I remember one teacher who told me that the only thing she thought she could do for her students, apart from delivering lessons, was to read storybooks to them. And we were not talking about the small young children. We were talking about the grade 5, the grade 6, even up the grade 7. She took books and she started just reading to them through the online platform. And she said she was so amazed by the results that it created a sense of togetherness, a sense of community. And through the stories, students found a platform through which they could also express their own worries. The second part of positive school culture is positive peer-to-peer relationship. Now, the picture on the screen is very small, but the story behind this picture is large. These 6 students went to UWC Bosnia-Herzegovina and met their classmate called Amini. Amini lived in Afghanistan. And last year, in 2021, when the Taliban, or when Amini saw that the Taliban was going to run over the country, she knew she had to get out. Positive peer-to-peer relationships literally helped Amini to escape from the situation that we're in. They had met in the school a number of years ago and were now all in different parts of the world, but each of them, when they heard the call for help, galvanized each other first as a group by starting a WhatsApp channel with including fellow alumni, not just UWC, but other international schools, setting up and raising funds on GoFundMe to get tickets for Amini to leave the country, writing endless letters to various ambassadors around the world describing Amini's situation. Amini also had a younger sibling. And because of their dedicated efforts, they were finally able to get Amini out. Not without trial and tribulation, no less than 3 attempted tries to get to the airport in Kabul. Positive peer-to-peer relationships on a day-to-day basis may not have to be so dramatic. But when I read the story, it told me how important it is that as in our classrooms, that we set up a network where students can learn to support each other. Sometimes they may not want to relate to educators. They may feel estranged from their family members, and so they turn to their peers, peers who are just like them, peers who understand them, peers who have walked in their shoes. So one of the things we can start thinking about is how do we establish these peer networks? How do we have maybe a peer support group that's running in our school? How do we equip students with the skills to be able to talk and build relationships with each other? The next part of positive school culture comes back to policies. Policies that actually support resilience. Policies that are structurally embedded within the school system so that it supports the students' ability to cultivate resilience. I say this because we can work a lot on cultivating the individual resilience skills, but if the school policies are not supportive, students are climbing up a mountain that's already very steep. And if the policies are against them, they would somehow over time start to feel helpless. So policies such as anti-bullying, creating cultures that support diversity and inclusion so that students don't find such huge obstacles in trying to utilize the resilience skills that we have taught them. Last of all, a sense of belonging and meaning. In this time, the 2 predominant emotions that students might be feeling, apart from the confusion, is likely to be a sense of helplessness. What does this mean for me? Or a sense of hopelessness. What does the future hold for me? Can I dare to dream? Is there anything that me as a student I can do sitting here in my room, having my lessons online? Is there anything that I can do even at all? One way to help them feel hopeful again is by creating meaning and a sense of belonging, helping them to feel that they belong somewhere, even though they may be miles apart from their classmates. Now, one of the things I did when I was in the Ministry of Education in Singapore was to go visiting around different regions in Asia. And one of the things brought me to Australia. I don't know whether there are any people listening from Australia or some Australians here in the crowd today. But one thing I remember very clearly was the time out programs that some of the schools had instituted for the students who were at risk of dropping out. And I fondly remember one particular one where they got the students to come back to school, not to study, but to help to build up the beautiful garden that the school was endeavoring to create. Not only that, they got them to do a little bit of hard labor by building a wall around that garden. And guess what? The more they worked on that garden, the more they see the flowers start to flourish, the greater number of students start coming back to school. Creating a sense of meaning and belonging can counteract the sense of hopelessness and helplessness some of our students may be feeling. Positive school culture is the first big piece. Now, the second piece is about collaborating. Just as Amini and her friends looked at the entire network as a school, there is so much resource in your network. Collaboration with stakeholders could look like external agencies. Back to the story about the Time Out programs in Australia, they had collaborated with many people in the community, skilled workers who could teach them how to plant the plant properly so that the plant could thrive. Bricklayers who taught them how to make the bricks such that the wall would not collapse. In our context, we might be thinking about VWOs, we might be thinking about external business agencies for which we can get students meaningfully occupied. The second stakeholder, of course, is the partnership with parents or guardians. On another one of the field trips that I made, took me all the way to Hong Kong. And in Hong Kong, one particular school reminded me of a fantastic strategy which they used to partner with their parents. And up to this day, it makes me smile, simply because the strategy was called Sunshine Calls, as bright as my jacket. And when I asked them, what is that all about? The school told me that they had started implementing Sunshine Calls, calling up parents to tell the parents great things that their child had done. Not just reporting on the negative behavior or poor results, but calling them, bringing a little bit of sunshine into their life. At the time, I was not a parent then, but now, as a mom of two, I asked myself, would I love to receive that? Would it make me want to collaborate further with the school? I think maybe even if I wasn't intending to, it might lead me a little bit more positively. So Sunshine Calls might be one of the things that get you started into that partnership. And in this time, really finding that collaboration with the parent and guardian is so important. As the story of Alex showed, what student shows in class may not be what they're showing at home. And the more information we can garner, the more commonalities we can find in partnership with the stakeholders, the more likely we can form that net, that safety net that can support the student. The greater alignment we can have, the greater support there is for students. Last of all, we're talking about school alumni or any other people who are connected with the schools. In times like these, we may not be able to have school alumni come physically to talk to the students. But one school that I worked with found a way to do this by having an alumni summit, getting all the different people who had different experiences, particularly experiences of overcoming challenges, various types of challenges in their life, to offer perspective to the students and to tell stories of how they may have started off struggling but ended up overcoming. And as a result of that particular summit, students again felt that they had now permission to share their hopes and their dreams, but at the same time, the struggles that they had been experiencing. Collaboration with our stakeholders can be part of that safety net in cultivating student resilience. Now, the last part of this is about the individual skills. Now, many of us probably spend a lot of time already cultivating these individual skills. The first one is about managing their emotions, whether it is through explicit lessons where we teach students proactively, for example, how to cultivate positive emotions like gratitude, hope, and joy, or whether it is through implicitly when they are doing their co-curricular activities, when they're staying back and preparing for a dance, just like we saw earlier, the song and dance. Are we able to bring these skills into their day-to-day life? Managing emotions is one part of cultivating that resilience. The second part is about thinking flexibly. For example, tapping on Carol Dweck's work in the area of growth mindset, such that when they encounter challenges, we don't want students to look at the challenge and think, whoa, that challenge is a dead end. And maybe you have encountered that with your students, that when they go through something difficult, or perhaps they haven't done so well in a project, they start to think, my world is over. With the growth mindset, they will be a bit more flexible about their thinking and instead start to think about the lessons that they can garner from the failures that they've had. The third skill that we can focus on is about learning how to relate to others, cultivating the relationships, the social skills, learning how to listen to each other, learning how to give feedback to each other, understanding the social context, learning what it means for a person to be different from me and have a different opinion, and maybe instead of feeling defensive or dismissive, be able to utilize the skill of curiosity and ask, hey, what's that all about? Could you tell me more? And perhaps through those stories, be able to learn how to relate to people who are different from them and similar to them as well. And last of all, leveraging their strengths. I like to see the strengths as a cup, or rather, every student has a cup. And when they come to school, sometimes their cup is full of words that people have told them that they're good, that they're able to overcome this, that within them they have the capability to do anything that's possible. Some students come with their cups full, or maybe half. But some students come to school with their cups empty, or maybe they're just trying very hard to paddle below, hoping to find something there. I think that we as educators can remind them, help them to become aware of their strengths, the capabilities in each and every single one of them. And the more we do that, the more we communicate those examples to them, we are filling their cup bit by bit. And if we are trying to build student resilience, what we want them to understand is very simple. I believe in you. Yes, you can. And it's all within you. You have the inner resources inside of you. And if they don't, then we are here to show you what they are. Through your own behavior, we want to shine the mirror back to you to let you know, hey, I see this in you. So for now, I'd love for you to start thinking about a couple of students in your mind. And I really want you to think about a student whom either is someone that perhaps you're struggling with, maybe in terms of behavior, or maybe in terms of connection, or you could also think about a student who's very quiet. We call them the silent majority. Sometimes you don't quite know what to make of them. And would like for you to spend the next 30 seconds thinking about the strengths they might have. You can even write them down on your piece of paper. Just list one or two strengths that you see in these students. Maybe there's a particular student's face coming to your mind. And if I go back to Alex, I like to think of Alex's strengths as being resilient. Yes, he did throw a temper tantrum right in front of me, but the fact that he was able to go back home to that environment every single day and yet show up and still carry out his responsibilities as a student, help his friends, bring that curiosity, another strength of his, gave him a lot of fuel to overcome those challenges. So now that you've thought about those strengths, we are going to go to another Mentimeter. And the question I want to ask you is, what strengths do your students have? And what's going to happen when you do this, and I think we can have the Menti screen up on the board, is that a beautiful word cloud is going to appear. Because in the time that we are going through, we want to turn our attention into what's going right. What is it that every single student, even if it's not visible straight away, has within them this cup and has within them this inner resources which we can continue to mirror and to build. So let's pull up the Menti screen. Right? Same QR code, same number. Please just key in. You have the option to key in more than one strength. So let's key in strengths that you see in your students. Okay, and then we're going to see the word cloud come up. Right. So now that you look up on the screen, as word clouds go, you'll notice that the bigger the word means that many of you have identified this strength in your students. So I'm seeing curiosity, creativity, empathy, passion, humor, kindness, hopefulness, emotional intelligence, have a go attitude, the can-do attitude, adaptability, happiness, collaborative perseverance. Now, as we see the word cloud dancing on the screen, what are you feeling within? If every single student is made aware of what their strengths are, when challenges hit them, instead of thinking, oh no, I can't do this, or perhaps thinking, man, this is so hard, or looking at the future in front of them and thinking, it seems like it's just disappeared. What we want instead for them is to look within and ask themselves, what are the strengths I have inside of me? The inner resources that I can tap on even when it comes to facing my challenges. Because if they can do that, and every single one of them has the possibility to do so, I think our students are in great state for being able to overcome the challenges and thrive amidst the adversity. Right, so let's look at the screen one more time. I'm seeing the biggest word there is creativity. Very, very important, especially during this time. And one little nugget about creativity is that it is really challenging to be creative when the atmosphere or when the internal emotional state is negative. You see, whenever we encounter stress or negative emotions, the emotional part of the brain, the amygdala, constricts and focuses on how to survive, focuses on how to meet the threat. And the two instinctive responses are typically to run away or to fight it. And in those states, it is really hard to be creative. So we, as a community, can create that positive school culture, that collaboration with the stakeholders, and reminding our students of what they have within them. So I want to end off today's talk. There's been a lot of theory, but I know that sitting in the room here and listening online are many of you who are key decision makers or hold key appointments in leadership, thinking about the practical implementation. So part of my work, apart from delivering, is also to support schools in the implementation of whatever I've just talked about for the last 30 minutes or so. So we're going to spend the last few minutes talking about theory to application. In the area of positive school culture, we can start thinking about key questions such as, how can I strengthen or create opportunities to strengthen teacher-student relationship, or perhaps to strengthen pupil-to-pupil relationship, so that we can strengthen that net of support for students to be able to be resilient. What are the current platforms that I have in my school? What are the current resources that I might have? What is the foundation that I already have, such that I can build upon this foundation and incorporate a little bit of what you've learned today? Second question is more like an audit. Are the policies in my school supportive of student resilience? Third question is, how can I create opportunities where students can find meaning and purpose so that they feel and can combat the sense of hopelessness and helplessness that they might be feeling? That is in the area of positive school culture. In the area of collaboration, it's all about alignment and strengthening the relationship. So questions such as, how can we work together for greater alignment with the stakeholders that I partner with? Perhaps We have been working with the same key stakeholders all the time, and maybe in these times we have to innovate and think really beyond the lines of that box. way, way beyond, and think, hey, who are new partners who could come in to support particular groups of students that I'm seeing that have maybe particular interests or perhaps might be struggling in a particular way. Maybe I can think of stakeholders who come in to support that part of the population, right? And then the third part on building the students' individual skills, we want to start thinking about what are the key skills I need to have. Perhaps in that list that you heard about earlier, you already are touching on one, if not all of them. Then perhaps for the rest of the year ahead, thinking into 2022, 2023, we want to ask ourselves, what are the key skills of resilience that I can equip my students with? Something that is tangible, that allows them to bounce back and recover and have those coping skills. What programs or platforms do I currently have that I could build upon? And last of all, what opportunities are there for further, what opportunities can we create within the classroom where students can cultivate these individual skills? You see, as implementers, the one thing we not start to be thinking about is, what do we have that we can build upon? Because when we do that, it also supports the teachers. One thing that I didn't talk about much, but is so critical, is that teachers will be the key implementers on the ground. Whatever we want to do for student resilience must be implementable by the teachers. And if we can think of the current parts of their daily routine, where we can factor in these programs or factor in these concepts, teachers can already doing them. And it won't be too much taxing if we add on just a little bit onto the current things that they're doing. Last of all, the last considerations for implementation. We may start thinking about it from the angle of student needs. Is there an urgency in a particular area? Or perhaps we can look at it across the levels, thinking about it developmentally, because a grade 4 student will need something very different from a grade 11 student. Similarly, a student who is 8 years old, maybe at the stage where they're just trying to figure out their friendships, but at a student who is 15 is trying to figure out their identity. Very different considerations. The second consideration is building upon the existing foundation. What is the amount of time that you have to actually carry out something that you conceptualize? What are the existing resources that you have now that can be tapped on, that can be utilized? Or maybe what you have now may not be sufficient, in which case, where can we go for these resources? And last of all, what part of the existing school culture is already leaning in the right direction? Because if we are able to build upon that, teachers directionally are already doing that, and it will be much easier to jump on board. Last of all, we want to think about sustainability. It may be easy to start something, but if we're thinking about student resilience, we don't want to just start something, but not think about how it's going to be sustained. After all, we want our students to be resilient not just while they are with us in school, but also beyond. That when they exit school and go into the world out there, that they have something that they can confidently say, I've learned in my time that I was in this school. Sustainability is talking about how you can embed it in the day-to-day routine. It's also about making sure that teachers feel confident and feel competent to be able to deliver, whether it's the explicit lessons, or to be able to implicitly blend it into their interaction with the students through things like positive language or their daily interaction with students. So, in summary, I hope that today's session on resilience has given you a big picture idea of how we as a school, as a community, can build the student resilience in this uncertain world. I think we have got to pull out all the stops. The fact is that they are facing a very challenging environment as we are. And if we want them to be sustainably resilient, we have got to think about the big picture as well as the day-to-day skills that students will need. And if we do that, I strongly believe students will be able to thrive amidst the adversity, even if we don't know what it is. So focus on positive school culture, tap on your existing network through collaboration, and last of all, impart the individual skills that students can use to triumph amidst adversity. And so thank you so much, everybody. Honestly, it's just great joy to be here to share about my favorite topic. And to conclude, I'll just come back to the story on Alex. As a result of what he was going through, I recommended that Alex and his family to go for some support in the community. We tapped on the existing resource with VWOs, and together with his mother, who was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, they both went to see a counselor for an extended period of time. And after that 1 whole year, Alex came back. And though he was still agitated, sometimes he was in a much better position to express his emotions and let me know when things weren't going so well. And in my dictionary, I call that a win. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Sha-En, for championing positive education and reminding us that we need to take a concerted effort in helping students build the pillars for a flourishing life and not just merely surviving. We now proceed to the Q&A session with Sha-En. Ladies and gentlemen, please submit your questions for Sha-En on the virtual conference, please. Conference platform, please. Sha-En, we have a first question. As a leader, how do you manage a situation with educators who do not prioritize their relationship with their students?
That's a great question. I get that question very much. I work a lot with school leaders and heads of departments. And I love to go back to Simon Sinek's book, Start with Why. In Simon Sinek's book, he describes the 3 circles with why in the middle, and then the what and the how in the outer circles. And whenever leaders are struggling with this, I always go back to them and say, let's talk about the why. Sometimes we spend a lot of time talking about how to do things and what to do. And many of them are already pretty skillful at what they're doing. But perhaps what they have not been able to see is a strong purpose that connects them to wanting to build this relationship. Of course, there will be some who want to have the data, in which case I would say have on hand with you some important research and data that supports your point, but more importantly, begin with the why. Think of a story that you could tell in which the relationship with the teacher had a tremendous impact on students. And the more stories you can galvanize that channel towards positive outcomes, the more we can advocate for that. Of course, I want to add on that, we have a saying here in Chinese. I can't pronounce it in Chinese very well, but it goes, or maybe you have heard it. You can pull the horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. I think that this idea of teacher-student relationship as with resilience is advocacy. And it has to be genuine from us. It shouldn't be something that we push because it's part of our agenda, but because we believe in it. And through our role modeling, through the stories that we tell, we can influence some of them to perhaps see it from our point of view. It's a process, as with resilience, not something that can be overcome overnight. But I think if we are able to do that, start with why, we're more likely to get straight to the heart of the matter, as opposed to getting lost in all the strategies that we're trying to deliver. Yeah.
Thank you. For the next question, do you think we need to build the teacher's resilience first? Because it's not only transferring the knowledge, but also how we put our hearts to transfer this message of resilience.
I wish I could answer that question in a minute. Yes, I would say that absolutely it is necessary. And therefore, one of the things that I recommended is for teachers to have similar kinds of training that we share with the students. Right? If we're teaching students about overcoming or cognitive reframing, then we should also share it with teachers. After all, teachers also go through similar struggles. Teachers are also going through the pandemic. And if we're able to give them the tools, not only will they be able to use it for themselves, after having that experience of being able to use it for themselves, they can now better understand how the students can potentially use it in their own lives. And when there should be challenges that students find from using the tools and strategies, the teachers would have the empathy because they themselves have gone through it. So it's a win-win if we can spend the time and resources to impart the skills to teachers as well. Because when the teacher's well-being is up, so are students.
Thank you. Last question.
Yeah, thank you.
Teachers need to support and be able to say, I believe in you, to a student. If a teacher gives up and considers a student hopeless, how can you deal with such a teacher?
Great question. I think in Carol Dweck's research, she found that when it comes to the growth mindset, that one of the pedagogical skills required for a teacher with a growth mindset is actually perseverance in believing in the student. So specific. And I think if a teacher has given up, or at least they say they have given up, I think we don't want to dismiss it straight away. I think there are always, I think if we think about an iceberg, there will always be presenting behaviors on the surface, and there will be lots of things under the surface. Instead of jumping onto what's on the surface, I think we want to actually spend time to understand what are the obstacles that could be in the way. Most of the time, the teacher themselves may feel ill-equipped to be able to manage their students or be able to connect with their students. Not everybody is a natural connector, nor maybe some of the teachers themselves have not been through formal education on cultivating those social skills. Sometimes I think we assume that they know how to do it, right? And then the other concern that they might have is, what if I don't know how to manage the boundaries? What if I get too close to the matter and I bring all of this home? How do I navigate that? And I found that the more we are open to listening to the challenges that they might be facing, then perhaps we can get closer to helping them see the impact of their hopelessness for the students and be able to maybe take steps in the opposite direction. I can safely say that most teachers do not 100% believe that a student is hopeless. Most of the time it's because the behaviors that they have to manage are overwhelming and they don't know what to do about it. And they themselves feel hopeless about the situation and managing it. And that sometimes translates down to the students. Yeah, so I hope that answers all the questions. Thank you so much. Great questions. Thank you.